The silver shuttle glided through space, carrying the human diplomatic team toward the massive alien ship. Inside, Tom Reed adjusted his collar for the 10th time. As Earth's leading linguist, he had practiced first contact protocols for months, but nothing could have prepared him for the real thing. Next to him, Captain Mary White checked her tablet one last time. The initial radio contact with the aliens, who called themselves the Stellar Assembly, had gone well enough. Now came the hard part. Face-to-face meetings. The shuttle docked with a soft thud. Tom took a deep breath as the airlock hissed open. 6 tall, blue-skinned aliens waited on the other side. Their long faces and 4 eyes gave them a look of constant surprise. The lead alien stepped forward and touched its chest with 3 fingers. "Welcome, Earthborn," it said through a translation device. "I am first speaker." Tom and Mary exchanged glances. The translation was rough but understandable. Mary stepped forward and copied the 3-finger gesture. "We bring greetings from Earth." The meeting room was huge, with windows showing the starry depths of space. As they sat down, Tom couldn't help but notice how the aliens kept staring at them. It wasn't the usual curiosity he had expected. There was something else in those 4-eyed gazes, something like confusion. The talks began smoothly. They discussed trade, territories, and basic cultural exchange. But every time a human spoke, Tom noticed the aliens tilting their heads, as if listening for something beyond the words. During a break in the talks, Tom walked to the window, muttering an old Sanskrit prayer his grandmother had taught him. It was a habit when he was nervous. Asatoma sad gamaya. Tamaso majoter gamaya. The room went completely silent. Tom turned around to find every alien frozen in place, all 4 eyes wide open. The first speaker's translator clattered to the floor. The alien's hand shook as it pointed at Tom. "You?" The first speaker switched off its translator, and in its natural voice made sounds that sent chills down Tom's spine. They were eerily similar to the Sanskrit verse he had just spoken. The other aliens began talking rapidly in their native tongue. Tom's translator caught fragments. "Impossible. The sacred words. How can they know?" First speaker raised all 4 hands for silence. It picked up the translator with trembling fingers. "How do you know the tongue of the Star Walkers?" Mary stepped forward, confusion clear on her face. "I'm sorry, but we don't understand. My colleague was simply speaking Sanskrit, an ancient Earth language." "Ancient?" First speaker's voice cracked with emotion. "Those words you spoke, they are from the language of our ancestors, a civilization that vanished 50,000 years ago. We preserve only fragments of their speech in our most sacred texts, yet you speak it as if." The alien's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "As if it lives and breathes." Tom's mind raced. The similarities between Sanskrit and the alien's natural speech, the way they reacted to his prayer. Could it be? His hand shook as he pulled out his tablet and pulled up a Sanskrit dictionary. "First speaker," he said carefully, "would you be willing to listen to more of our ancient language?" The alien leader stepped closer, all 4 eyes fixed on Tom. "You have more. We have entire libraries of texts in this language and its related tongues. It's one of the oldest languages of our world." The room erupted in alien whispers. First speaker raised a hand again, and the room fell silent. When it spoke through the translator, its voice was heavy with emotion. "The High Council must be informed immediately." It turned to Mary. "Captain, I believe our peoples have much more to discuss than simple trade agreements. It seems your Earth has been keeping secrets even you didn't know about." Tom looked out at the stars again, his grandmother's prayer still echoing in his mind. Somehow, he knew that everything was about to change. 6 months earlier, in a dusty room at the World Language Center, Tom Reed stared at his computer screen. Scattered around him were old books, their pages yellow with age. For 3 days straight, he had been comparing strange patterns in ancient Sanskrit texts with something even stranger: space signals. It had started with Dr. Ann Baker's discovery in India. Her team had found stone tablets in an underground chamber that didn't match any known time period. The writing looked like Sanskrit, but the patterns were unusual. That alone would have been interesting, but it was what happened next that changed everything. The radio astronomy team at the Global Space Center had picked up signals from deep space. Normal procedure was to analyze them for patterns. But when one of the technicians, who had seen Dr. Baker's findings on the news, noticed something odd. The space signals had the same pattern as the ancient tablets. "Look at this again," Tom said to Dr. Baker, who sat across from him. He pointed at his screen. "The way these Sanskrit verses are structured, it's not random. They follow the exact same mathematical pattern as the alien signals." Anne leaned forward, pushing her glasses up her nose. "But that's impossible. These texts are thousands of years old. How could they match signals we just received from space? Unless—" Tom opened another file. "Unless someone put them here. Look at this." He showed her a comparison of sound waves. One was from reading the Sanskrit texts aloud. The other was from the space signals, slowed down and adjusted. They were almost identical. Over the next few weeks, more experts joined their team. They found more connections. Words that had never made complete sense in Sanskrit suddenly clicked when compared to the space signals. Strange symbols in old temples matched patterns in the radio bursts. One evening, as they worked late, a young researcher named Jim burst into the room. "You need to see this." He was carrying a tablet showing a live feed from a space telescope. "We just picked up more signals. But this time they're coming from somewhere else." The team gathered around. The new signals were coming from the opposite direction in space, but they had the same patterns. It wasn't random noise from stars. Someone, or something, was out there, using a language that looked eerily like ancient Sanskrit. Tom spent the next month building a database. He matched every Sanskrit sound they had with the signals from space. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Sanskrit wasn't just similar to these space signals. In many ways, it was the same language, just changed over thousands of years. Like how Latin changed into French and Spanish, Anne said one day as they looked at their findings. Sanskrit might be an Earth version of some ancient space language. The government got involved after that. Top officials visited their lab. Military experts asked questions. Space agencies from around the world sent their data. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. If Sanskrit was connected to something in space, what did that mean for Earth? They got their answer 2 months later. The first alien signals arrived. Not the random patterns they had been studying, but clear attempts at communication. The aliens were coming, and they were using signals that matched parts of Sanskrit. That's when Tom was chosen for the first contact team. His knowledge of Sanskrit and its connection to these space signals made him the perfect choice. As he packed his research to leave Earth, he found an old photo of his grandmother teaching him Sanskrit prayers as a child. "You were right, Grandma," he whispered, looking at her smiling face in the picture. "You always said Sanskrit was a divine language. You just didn't know how right you were." Little did he know then that those childhood prayers would soon change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Back in the present, Tom sat in the alien ship's grand archive room. The walls glowed with soft blue light, showing countless symbols that danced in the air. First Speaker stood before a large screen, its 4 eyes reflecting the moving images of star maps and ancient texts. The Star Walkers, First Speaker began, were the greatest civilization our galaxy has ever known. The alien touched a control panel, and a hologram filled the room. Countless stars and planets appeared, connected by lines of light. Their empire stretched across 3 galaxies. They were our ancestors, the ones who gave birth to all spacefaring races we know today. Mary leaned forward in her seat. What happened to them? First Speaker's upper eyes closed, a sign of sadness. They vanished. 50,000 years ago, every Star Walker disappeared in a single day. They left behind their cities, their ships, their technology. But they took with them the most precious thing, their knowledge. The hologram changed, showing strange buildings and machines. We found their empty cities. Their mighty ships still float in space, but we could never fully understand their language. Without it, most of their knowledge remained locked away. Tom pulled out his tablet, where he had been taking notes. You said you have some records of their language. Only fragments, small pieces used in ceremonies. First speaker touched another control. Strange symbols appeared in the air. These marks are sacred to us. We speak them in our holiest rituals, but their true meaning was lost ages ago. Tom looked at the symbols and felt his heart beat faster. He knew these marks. They were almost identical to signs found in ancient Indian temples. He pulled up images from Earth's archaeological sites on his tablet and held it up. First speaker's 4 eyes widened. The alien's hand shook as it took the tablet. Impossible. These are Star Walker script. Perfect Star Walker script. Where did you find this? These are carved on temples in India, Tom explained. They're at least 5,000 years old, and we can read them. The room erupted in excited whispers from the other aliens. First speaker raised all 4 hands for silence. You can read them. Tom nodded and pointed to one set of symbols. This part talks about the movement of stars. And this, he pointed to another, is about the nature of space and time. First speaker sank into a seat, all 4 eyes blinking rapidly. We have debated the meaning of these marks for thousands of years. Our greatest scholars devoted their lives to understanding just pieces of them. Mary spoke up. But why would the Star Walkers leave their language on Earth? Perhaps, first speaker said slowly, they chose your world for a reason. Tell me, how did your people preserve this knowledge? Tom explained about Sanskrit, how it was passed down through generations as a sacred language, used in prayers and holy texts. He told them about how it survived through oral tradition, with teachers carefully training students to pronounce each sound perfectly. First speaker listened intently. They were brilliant. The alien finally said, the Star Walkers didn't just leave their language on Earth. They made sure it would stay alive, evolving naturally with your people. The living language, not just dead marks on stones. But why Earth? Mary asked. Why us? First speaker stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. That is what we must discover. The Star Walkers were known for their wisdom. If they chose Earth, if they chose humans to preserve their tongue, they must have had a greater purpose. The alien turned back to face them. We have spent millennia trying to piece together our ancestors' legacy. Now, thanks to Earth's preservation of their language, we might finally understand why they disappeared and what they were trying to tell us. The next few weeks aboard the alien ship turned into a flurry of activity. The humans converted one of the large meeting rooms into a working space, with screens showing ancient texts from Earth on one side and alien ceremonial writings on the other. Tom spent hours working with the alien scholars, comparing words and sounds. Look at this, he said to first speaker one day, pointing to his tablet. The Sanskrit word for star, Tara, sounds almost exactly like your word Tarak, and both come from the Star Walker's word Tarak. First speaker moved closer, all 4 eyes focused on the screen. Yes, yes, and see how the sound changes follow a pattern. The same pattern appears in other words too. The excitement of discovery was infectious. More alien scholars arrived from their homeworld, bringing ancient texts and recordings. They found that it wasn't just Sanskrit. Other old Earth languages had pieces of the Star Walker's tongue hidden in them too. Like a puzzle spread across the whole planet, Anne said during one of their daily video calls with Earth. She was still working with her team back home, sending new findings to the ship. They must have visited different parts of Earth, leaving pieces of their language everywhere. But not everyone was happy about these discoveries. Tom noticed how some of the alien scholars would step back when humans spoke their ceremonial words. They would whisper among themselves, their 4 eyes narrowed with distrust. One day, He overheard two alien scholars talking in a corridor. His translator picked up their words. "It's not right. These humans are primitive beings. They build cities of stone while we travel between stars. How dare they speak the sacred tongue so casually?" The tension grew when Tom's team discovered that humans had been using Star Walker words in everyday speech for thousands of years. Words for cooking, farming, and simple tasks. Things the aliens only used in their most sacred ceremonies. "You must understand," first speaker explained to Tom privately. "For us, these words are holy. We speak them only in our greatest temples, only on the most important days. To hear them used for talking about daily meals and weather." The aliens' hands trembled slightly. But other aliens saw things differently. A young scholar named Lightseeker spent hours with Tom, fascinated by how the ancient language had evolved on Earth. "It's beautiful," Lightseeker said, watching videos of children in India learning Sanskrit verses. "On our worlds, the language stayed frozen in time, locked in ceremony. But on Earth, it lived. It grew. It changed with your people." The breakthrough came when they found similarities between ancient Earth music and alien ceremonial chants. Tom brought out recordings of old Sanskrit hymns, and the aliens played their sacred songs. When they played them together, the patterns meshed perfectly. First speaker called an emergency meeting. The grand meeting hall was packed with both species. The combined music played through the ship's speakers, human voices and alien tones weaving together in harmony. "Our ancestors gave their language to Earth as a gift," first speaker announced. "Not to be locked away in chambers like we did, but to live and grow. The humans are not primitive. They are the guardians of our heritage, chosen by the Star Walkers themselves." The room fell silent. Then Lightseeker stood up. "I request permission to study Earth languages full-time. Not just the ceremonial forms, but all of them. Every change, every new word they created. It's all part of our shared history." More aliens stood, making the same request. The wall of distrust was starting to crack. As Tom watched, he realized they were witnessing more than just a cultural exchange. They were watching the birth of something new. A bridge between two civilizations, built with words that had waited 50,000 years to be understood again. The combined team of humans and aliens worked late into the night cycle aboard the ship. Screens filled with ancient text floated in the air around them. Tom rubbed his tired eyes as he compared an old Sanskrit poem with an alien ceremonial chant for the 100th time. "There's something here we're missing," he said to Lightseeker, who had become his regular working partner. "These verses aren't just similar. They're exactly the same pattern. But why this pattern?" Lightseeker's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought. "Show me the Earth poem again." Tom pulled up the Sanskrit text. It was a strange verse about stars and numbers that had never made much sense to scholars. The aliens' ceremonial chant shared the same rhythm and similar words. Anne's voice came through the video link from Earth. "Try reading them at the same time." Tom and Lightseeker looked at each other. They hadn't tried that yet. Tom began reading the Sanskrit verse while Lightseeker chanted the alien ceremony. The words overlapped, creating new sounds. Suddenly, first speaker burst into the room. "Stop. Say that again." They repeated the overlapping verses. First speaker rushed to a control panel and began entering the sounds into the ship's computer. The screens around them flickered. "Of course," first speaker whispered. "The verses aren't meant to be read separately. They're two parts of the same message." Numbers began appearing on the main screen. They weren't random. They were coordinates in space. Hidden in the combined verses was a map, pointing to a specific location far from both Earth and the alien homeworld. "But that's not all," Anne said through the video link. She sent new data to their screens. "Look at these other verses we found. They all have matching alien chants, don't they?" They spent the next several hours combining more Earth poems with alien ceremonies. Each combination revealed new coordinates, new numbers, new pieces of information. It was like unlocking a giant puzzle that had been split between two worlds. They hid a message in plain sight, Mary said, watching the coordinates form a pattern on the star map. Half on Earth, half with your people. We needed each other to find it. The coordinates pointed to a distant part of space. When they zoomed in on that sector, they found something that made everyone in the room gasp. Hidden in a cluster of old stars was a massive structure, bigger than any space station ever built. The computer identifies it as Star Walker architecture, first speaker said, voice shaking with excitement. It's been there all this time, waiting. We just never knew where to look. The structure was dark, showing no signs of power or life, but it was perfectly preserved, protected by some kind of ancient technology. Initial scans showed it was some kind of library or data storage facility. Think about it, Tom said, looking at the structure's image. The Star Walkers split their message between us. They left half of the coordinates in Sanskrit poems on Earth and half in ceremonial chants with your people. They knew that someday we would have to work together to find this place. Lightseeker moved closer to the screen. But why hide it like this? Why not just tell one of our peoples where it was? Because, first speaker said slowly, they wanted to make sure we would find it together. They didn't want just one civilization to have access to whatever is inside. They wanted us to share it. The room fell quiet as everyone stared at the image of the massive structure. After 50,000 years, the Star Walkers' hidden message had finally been found. But what waited for them inside that ancient library? What knowledge had the Star Walkers thought was so important that they created this elaborate puzzle to protect it? Mary stepped forward. Well, she said, there's only one way to find out. 3 weeks later, the joint human-alien expedition approached the massive structure floating in space. Their ship looked tiny next to it. The ancient building was shaped like a giant ring, with spikes pointing inward toward a glowing center. Despite being 50,000 years old, its surface still shone like polished metal. Tom stood at the main window with first speaker and Lightseeker, watching as they drew closer. Behind them, teams of both species checked their equipment one last time. Nobody had been inside a Star Walker building this well-preserved before. Look at the markings, Tom said, pointing to symbols that covered the structure's surface. They're the same as the ones in Indian temples. The Star Walkers really did leave their mark on Earth. Their ship docked with a gentle thud. The team gathered at the airlock, everyone double-checking their spacesuits. The structure had power, but nobody knew if it still had air after all these years. Remember, first speaker told the group, we need humans to lead the way. They can read the original language better than we can. Tom went first, floating through the airlock with Mary close behind. Their helmet lights showed a long corridor ahead, its walls covered in flowing script. The air pressure readings surprised them. The building still had a perfect atmosphere inside. It's safe to remove our helmets, Mary announced after checking the readings 3 times. The air is clean. The Star Walker's technology is still working after all this time. As they took off their helmets, soft lights began turning on along the corridor. The structure was responding to their presence. More team members came through the airlock, both humans and aliens looking around in wonder. Tom walked to the nearest wall and began reading the script. These aren't just decorations, he said excitedly. They're directions. This is a map of the facility. Lightseeker moved next to him, all 4 eyes scanning the text. You're right. And look, these symbols show it's some kind of knowledge storage center. The Star Walkers kept their most important information here. Following the wall's directions, they made their way deeper into the structure. Every few steps, new lights came on, as if the building was waking up after a long sleep. They passed through rooms filled with strange machines and halls lined with what looked like data storage devices. In the center of the ring, they'd found what they were looking for. A massive round chamber opened up before them, its ceiling lost in darkness above. In the middle stood a pillar of light reaching up into the shadows. This is it, first speaker whispered. The main data core. All their knowledge, their history, their science, it should all be here. Tom approached a control panel near the pillar. The symbols on it were perfectly clear to him. The same script he had studied in Sanskrit texts all his life. He placed his hand on the panel. The room hummed to life. The pillar of light pulsed, and suddenly the air was filled with floating images and text. Star maps, mathematical formulas, and technical diagrams surrounded them. But something else appeared too, a message written in the ancient script. To those who find this place, Tom read aloud, translating for everyone. You have proven yourselves worthy by working together. What you see around you is not just our knowledge, it is your heritage. We chose Earth to guard our language because we saw in humans the same spirit that drove us to the stars. And we chose our children, he nodded to the aliens, to guard our ceremonies until the time was right. Apart, you were safe. Together, you will be strong. The team stood in silence, watching the ancient knowledge float around them. After 50,000 years, the Star Walkers' plan had worked perfectly. Their legacy was no longer lost. And more importantly, it had brought two civilizations together in ways nobody could have imagined. 1 month after finding the Star Walker library, the mood on the alien ship had completely changed. The Great Hall, once used for formal meetings, now buzzed with activity as humans and aliens worked side by side. Holographic displays filled the air, showing information from the ancient database. Tom watched from a quiet corner as Light Seeker taught a group of human scientists how to use alien technology. In return, a team of Earth linguists helped alien scholars understand the subtle meanings in ancient Sanskrit texts. The two species had become more than just allies. They were becoming friends. It's amazing how much things have changed, Mary said, walking up to Tom with a tablet in her hand. A month ago, some of them wouldn't even look us in the eye. Now look at them. She was right. The aliens who once whispered about primitive humans now eagerly sought their help. The Star Walkers database had proved what First Speaker had suspected. Humans hadn't just preserved the ancient language by accident. They had been chosen. Tom, First Speaker called from across the room. We found something new in the database. Something important. The main screen lit up with a star map. But this wasn't like the other technical data they had been studying. This map showed something different. Movement. Streams of energy flowing through space, following patterns nobody had seen before. The Star Walkers were tracking something, First Speaker explained. Something that made them worried enough to hide their knowledge and split their people's future between our two species. Light Seeker joined them, all four eyes fixed on the moving patterns. These energy streams, they're getting stronger. The Star Walkers predicted they would peak around this time, our time. That's why they chose Earth, Tom said slowly, the pieces finally fitting together. They knew these energy patterns would affect space travel. Earth was protected, isolated. Their language could survive here safely until it was needed. More people gathered around the screen as First Speaker brought up another set of data. The Star Walkers didn't just disappear. They left to study these energy patterns up close. They thought the patterns might be signs of something entering our galaxy, something they had never seen before. A quiet fell over the room. The Star Walkers, the most advanced civilization known, had been worried enough about these patterns to create an elaborate plan spanning 50,000 years. So what do we do now? Mary asked, speaking the question on everyone's mind. First Speaker turned to face the crowd. We do what the Star Walkers prepared us to do, together. Their database doesn't just contain star maps and physics. It has plans for ships more advanced than anything we've ever built. Defenses against threats we never knew existed. But most importantly, it has proof that we're stronger together than apart. Light Seeker stepped forward. Our people have the technology and experience in space. Humans have the creativity and the living knowledge of the Star Walkers' language. Apart, neither of us could face what's coming. Together, Tom finished. We can finish what the Star Walkers started. Work began immediately. Ships from Earth were already on their way with more scientists and researchers. The Alien Council had approved the construction of joint facilities on both worlds. Humanity would take its place among the stars not as newcomers, but as equals. That evening, Tom found himself back in the quiet corner, looking out at the stars. He remembered the simple Sanskrit prayers his grandmother had taught him, never knowing they were part of something so much bigger. Now those same words were helping to unite two civilizations and prepare them for whatever was coming. A young alien apprentice approached him shyly. "Would you teach me one of your Earth verses?" she asked. "I want to learn the living language." Tom smiled and gestured for her to sit beside him. As he began teaching her the ancient words, he realized this was exactly what the Star Walkers had hoped for. Their children, separated by time and space, finally coming together again as one family, ready to face the future.